Hello and welcome to Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Allenwyma. Today I have, I'm blanking this morning.
Jamon Holmgren.
Jamon Holmgren, yeah, sorry about that.
You got it.
It's still waking up over here, as I told you before. It's about 7 a.m. over here, and still waking up. I got my coffee in my hand if you guys are watching the video.
That's good.
He's the CTO and co-founder of Infinite Red, a React Native-based consultancy. And I have to say I'm so happy that you're on because I've been tweeting and checking with people, and nobody wants to come on the podcast to talk about React Native.
Wow, are you just abusing your React Native guests here? Now I'm getting scared, Alan.
I think that's actually part of it, and the other part too is maybe it's just that Flutter is just so much better that nobody has a foot to stand on. I don't know. I want to try to open up my mind. So I said this on the show before in the past, and we talked a little bit before. Is that my experience with React Native was just disaster. Yep. Things would be working, and then I would upgrade a piece of it, and then the whole app would kind of fall apart on me. Yeah. And most people in Flutter, I think, are not huge fans of JavaScript. Mm-hmm. Yep. So yeah, that's also my thinking too. Is I'm not a huge fan of JavaScript. So But yeah, why don't we just get to know more about who you are, right? So that we have an idea about why you got your perspective. So can you tell us more about kind of like where you got started from, like? Why did you even get in the program to begin with? It's a big endeavor to take, right?
Yeah, totally. I started really when I was 12. So this was back in the early 90s. My dad brought home a computer for his excavation company. He was a little like small business, and he needed to be able to kind of do the books, right? Do the accounting, whatever. And he needed a computer to do this. He thought that might make him more organized. It didn't really make him more organized, but it did give me an opportunity to, kind of start exploring computers at a very young age. Actually, I think 11 was when I first started. And so I started by just modifying batch files, and seeing what that would do, in DOS. And then I eventually, Dad upgraded that was a 286. He upgraded to a 486 computer, and then that came with QBasic. So I was able to start playing around with, trying to code little games and stuff like that. And so I just loved it. It was just, I came from a blue collar family, up in the Pacific Northwest. My one grandpa was like a logger, and the other one was a union carpenter. And it was just like, blue collar all the way down. But for me, like, even though I didn't really have any role models that were programmers necessarily, there's one guy who was way too smart that I thought was the gold standard for programmers. And, but I did it for a while, and then kind of took a different path for a while. I ended up in construction helping my dad, and I worked for a home builder, and I did some CAD drafting and, remodel design and things like that. And I've talked about this in a few other podcasts as well, but the sort of the housing crash of 2008 really kind of put a stop to all of my construction stuff. And I started doing websites because I was like, well, I can do this, as a way to earn money, as I had started my business in 2005. So that took off, and I was able to start hiring employees in 2009. And we were doing PHP mainly to start with, PHP and JavaScript and MySQL and things like that. And then started building more web apps, eventually got into Ruby on Rails. And that was fun, kind of changed our stack. The first time I really changed my stack was to move into Ruby on Rails, and then started doing native iOS development. And that was fun to kind of learn Objective-C and move into another stack and another device and a whole different paradigm. And then in 2015, I merged with another consultancy out of San Francisco to become the new Infinite Red, which is the current company. I was able to kind of bring in two business partners, Todd Worth and Gant Laborde. And at that time, we decided that we were going to change our stack because we really wanted to have some sort of a framework that would allow us to, it was very painful writing for Android and iOS, native code. And Objective-C wasn't our favorite. We were Ruby developers, right? We wanted to write nice, better code. And knowing that your audience isn't necessarily big JavaScript fans, that may sound weird that we would go from, go to JavaScript to have a better experience. But it was better than Objective-C and Java, I guess. And so we kind of went that direction. Of course, eventually TypeScript came around and that made a lot of things nicer. But yeah, because of that, we kind of dropped a lot of the other things we were doing, Ember, Ruby on Rails, Elixir, and then we kind of backed more into React on the web side, but really kind of had the most traction with React Native, and we really love doing mobile apps. So that's where we ended up just kind of keeping the focus from 2015 onward. It was actually React Native 0.11, and I think we're up to 0.65 now. And we have clients where they started at 0.11 and we've upgraded them all the way to 0.65. So some of those pain points, Alan, that you've experienced, we've experienced all of them times 100.
So even with all that, you're still sticking with React Native? Yeah,
I mean, it's at the end of the day, we've like any tech stack, it's a trade-off, right? Like there's good things and there's bad things. There's never really, I mean, you might be able to find some languages and frameworks and stuff where you can say this is just all bad, possibly. But I don't really like to look at it that way. I look at it in terms of trade-offs, and a lot of times it's, your perspective, where you're coming from, your context, the things that are important to you. And as we've gotten through it, we've gotten to be pretty good at it. We've learned kind of the where the dragons lay, like stay away from that area, right? The shadowy area. And we've also seen the platform, the framework mature quite a bit. It's amazing how much more mature it is now. Still not at 1.0 for whatever reason. Actually, I kind of know why, but it's not at 1.0 yet. It's very much approaching it. But we also had a chance to be involved with the core team. We did our own open source around it. And so, the community around React Native, I think, is what keeps us coming back. And we do a lot of community work, too.
Yeah, I think the first time I heard about you guys, at least in React Native landscape, was your plugin for actually starting projects.
Oh, yeah. Ignite. Yep.
Ignite, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I was just working on it last night. Yeah.
I think that was one of the first times where I started my React Native project and it actually was working.
Yeah.
So that's just me, maybe. But yeah.
No, it's true. Yeah. I mean, we kept running into the same issues, right? And so like for us, we're consultancy. We have anywhere from 6 to 8 to 10 React Native projects going at any one time. So for us, it was like, we can't be spinning up apps and then having to spend 2 weeks configuring things so they all work. I mean, we know how to do it, but like, why spend the time, So for us, like we built the tool. My business partner, Gant Laborde, specifically was really instrumental. And he was working on a project and he's like, you know what? He collaborated with another one of our developers. He's like, let's get a stack in place. Let's get a standard stack in place. And there were even things like we would just apply, patches to it, like right out of the gate, where like once you've run Ignite new, whatever your app is, it would come out patched and ready to go. Now we've had to do a lot less of that lately, but that was very common in the early days for sure.
Okay. So actually, I'm a little bit surprised you guys dumped Elixir, because I do also, like I said, when we talked a while back, I said, hey, yeah. I remember Infinite Red because you guys did an Elixir Lightning talk, I think it was. Yeah. It was pretty interesting. But I mean, like, because even mobile apps, they all need a backend usually,
right?
Unless you're doing something very specific. Yeah. So why dump something like Elixir? I think that's like one of the best languages for a backend, considering the load it can handle and everything.
We still love Elixir. I built Thesis, which was along with one of my developers, Yulian Glukenko, built Thesis, which is like a content management system for Elixir. And it was really fun. We used actually P-React for the front end. And it's a very cool system. But the problem was, really, when it came down to it, we weren't doing that many backends. The people would come to us with a backend already, or they'd have a backend team already in place. And what they really valued us for was our React Native expertise. They needed a mobile app. They needed us to build it on iOS and Android. And they said, we've got the back end covered. And maybe they were using Elixir, maybe they weren't, maybe they're using Node, maybe they were using Ruby on Rails or whatever they were using, even, Firebase and other kind of serverless situations. So for us, it became less and less of a thing to be asked to do backend. And so our backend team kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And we would move people from our backend team to our React Native team. And eventually we made the decision, hey, you know what? Let's just go all in on React Native. It feels stable enough. It feels like enough people are using it now that we can, base our consultancy on this. This is a big step, right? Like you don't want to be putting yourself in a situation where the technology sinks and now you're in a tough spot. But we felt confident enough to do that, and it's been a good decision because now when people reach out to us, they know what we're about. We're not just another agency. We're the React Native agency. Like it's kind of like if you choose to do React Native, and obviously there are alternatives like Flutter, and they're great alternatives. But if you choose to do React Native, then you want to go out and find the best people to do that, and that's kind of the niche that we've put ourselves in.
Yeah, so going back to React Native, right? So what was the things that, we both acknowledge that there's pain points, right? And I think let's not keep digging on what you're here for, right?
Right.
Of course, I've also had pain points with Flutter, right? There's sometimes you get like a weird error and you're like, what the heck does this thing even mean?
Yeah.
And you have to really dig into it to understand it. But like, what was it that really said, okay, you know what? There's something here. I have to stick with this thing, and this is really where I want to be.
Yeah, well, I think that when we did our first two projects doing React Native, the jury was still out because, we'd been doing native iOS and Android apps. And so we knew how to do that. But we needed to determine that, we can put out a product that is good. And at the time, I remember thinking like, JavaScript, like I've seen this rodeo before, right? Like, PhoneGap or Cordova or Ionic, like there's some residual like pain, from seeing JavaScript on an iOS and Android app. And, but we did that and we put our best developers on it, and they went through, and there were pain points for sure. And they reported back and they kind of worked together on these two projects that we were doing simultaneously. And at the end of the project, we were able to deploy working apps that had a good UX, and both of them are still functional, one of which we still work on with the client. The other one kind of took it over internally, and their internal team is now managing it. But yeah, one was like a pizza chain up in Canada, and the other one is kind of a very niche product, but it's still going. And we have a developer that just spent a bunch of time on it, getting it up to the latest React Native. And so we saw that there was success there. And that's kind of how we approach a lot of these things. Like, we're going to run an experiment. We're not going to make up our minds before we have real, like actual knowledge of what it's, let's get an actual app out there, because there's so many things that can go wrong, and a demo can kind of like avoid those things or kind of slide by those things, but a real app can't. You have to actually deploy it. And so we were able to do that with two apps, and they were both successful. So that gave us a lot of confidence moving forward. And then after that, there really wasn't a lot of doubt, because every time that we would do a project, we'd get better at it. Every time we do a project, React Native would get a little better. There were certainly some moments where, there were a lot of pain points. Upgrades were a major pain point, major pain point for us. Like anytime a new upgrade would come out, we would be spending weeks trying to get it upgraded. And it felt very, very bad. But we gave that, and I was involved, and I'm still involved to some degree with the React Native core team. We gave that feedback to the core team, and over the course of I think it was 2018, 2019, they really focused on improving the upgrade process. And now it's not as big of a deal. Like when you get an upgrade, you go in, you do the updates that need to happen, and then you move forward, and it isn't as big of a deal. I do think that a lot of the sort of project priorities of React Native are a little different than Flutter's. And so like Flutter, developer experience is extremely important. And I'm sure if Flutter had been out at the same time as React Native when we first started, that there would have been probably a tougher decision to make right then. I don't remember exactly when Flutter came out. It wasn't really on our radar though at that time. But like we found that we were able to be successful with React Native, and so we moved forward from there. And we haven't really had a touch or a point where we felt like that's the wrong decision. There certainly are projects I think that would benefit more from Flutter, and there's some projects that would work better with React Native. One thing that really gave us a lot of confidence was when Microsoft actually hired us to do a project in React Native. And so it allowed us to come in and work with their team we were actually working on React Native Windows at the time. And we were, doing another project for them. So we were able to, work with Microsoft and know that they were putting a lot of investment into React Native too. So even if it wasn't perfect at the time, it was like, we can see the path, like it feels like there's a direction to go here.
Okay, so is Microsoft actually still working with React Native? Because I know they're pushing into Flutter recently.
Yeah, they've been doing some Flutter, but the Office team is rebuilding pretty much, as far as I know anyway. I haven't heard any different lately, but they are rebuilding pretty much all of Office in React Native. And this is web, this is mobile. They're also doing desktop. So they're doing React Native on Windows, and they're doing React Native on macOS. In fact, Microsoft is the primary maintainer of React Native macOS. So they are actually maintaining a lot of the out of, what we call off-platform or alternative platform targets for React Native. And so they have an enormous amount of effort going into React Native. I see them in the core team Discord all the time, talking with the Facebook engineers. So I'm not sure how much, it'd be interesting to hear from Microsoft, like how much Flutter they're doing versus how much React Native. And I'm sure there's some of that's like, different teams make different decisions, maybe different trade-offs involved. But I know the Office team is definitely focused on React Native right now.
So actually, I was completely unaware of this. I was under the impression that React Native only is for mobile. So actually, you can build for other platforms. Yeah.
In fact, we sort of like this year have made it a priority to be focused on React Native all platforms. I just spoke with a potential client this morning, for example, and they actually had done React Native Web first. So React Native Web was their initial target. Now they need to bring it into iOS and Android, and they want us to do that. And we released a project recently that shares code very heavily between iOS, Android, and web. We're working on a project that does React Native Windows, and then React Native macOS we haven't touched yet, but I want to. And then React Native tvOS is one that is an interesting one that my partner Gant is putting a lot of effort into kind of figuring that out. There's a lot of different, there's a talk at React Native EU 2019, which is over in Poland. And this talk was about, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but there's a company out there that does sort of like streaming video. They're basically like, they consult and build stuff that's sort of like Netflix, like if you want to build a Netflix-like service, and they use React Native for all of their platforms, including Roku, which is weird, but interesting. So they actually have a bunch of React Native stuff that they're interfacing with, like C++ on the back end and whatnot. At the end of the day, I mean, it's like once you separate the target, from the descriptive language that shows what the UI should be, now you can just start, pivoting that instead of React DOM. Now you've got React Native iOS, you've got React Native Android, and you can just start adding on platforms, at that point.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested to hear about the performance of React Native because I do remember, like, for sure, Facebook app for me has been a little bit buggy. And another weird thing about Facebook app is that sometimes, I don't think this is a problem of React Native necessarily, but I think it may be a problem of just Facebook is like, usually the latest notification should be at the top, but sometimes they get jumbled. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of these things aren't necessarily inherent to the framework you're using. There, I think a lot of times implementation issues. With that in mind, obviously there are dragons around performance, just like anything. And I know that, for example, Discord, the app Discord is entirely built in React Native. They've done a lot of things on performance to make sure that they were able to achieve native-like performance. And actually, Coinbase, we just interviewed for our podcast, little plug, React Native Radio podcast. That was very interesting, and we're releasing that. I don't know if it's this week or next week, but that was an interesting conversation with the Coinbase folks. And one of their key considerations, because they were bringing native developers to React Native, was they said, we can't be compromising on performance. Like, it has to feel fluid and smooth and those sort of things. So they were able to do that, and they were able to achieve the type of performance. And now when you look at Coinbase, it's all React Native. So there, obviously, like anywhere, there's gotchas. And then the other thing is, tomorrow morning, React Native EU online is starting its online conference, and Facebook is expected to give an update on Fabric, which Fabric is a re-architecture of the core architecture behind React Native to make it more. It's sort of like, how Flutter uses. They're communicating directly with the native APIs. React Native is going to be doing the same thing. And so you're going to have, much more, it'll be easier to achieve the type of fluidity that you need to. I think one of the biggest performance bottlenecks was the bridge, which, if you're not familiar with React Native's bridge, basically you had the JavaScript side, which is running in a like a JavaScript VM, and then it would have to communicate by serializing messages into strings, sending them over this communication layer, deserializing on the other side, and then running methods from there on the native side, and then the same thing back. So you're serializing and deserializing quite a bit. That doesn't work very well when you're doing like animations or anything that requires a lot of continuous communication. We found ways around it where it doesn't matter so much, but with Fabric, that's going to change a lot, and it's going to make things a lot easier.
So is there going to be any changes for the developer that they need to do to their app in order to use Fabric, or is it just upgrade your version and hopefully everything goes smoothly and then you're kind of in business? I'm
hoping it's the latter. And that is their goal, is to make it so that it's a seamless upgrade. Hopefully it's just internals. And then library authors may have some things that but they're still supporting the bridge, for a long time. So basically you can use either the bridge or the new architecture. So both of those options will be available. I think that's a good idea, because even though we're on 0 point something, a lot of people are using this in production, and you don't want to be breaking their apps with a big release that just breaks everything, right? So that's, but we'll see tomorrow. I'm going to be tuning in and seeing what's happening. And then we're going to do a podcast episode about that. We're going to record it on Friday and probably release it in a week or two, about, what's announced basically at that point.
Okay. Actually, I have to keep my eyes open on what's going on in React Native. It seems to be much farther ahead than I was imagining. I was thinking, at Flutter, you got 5 platforms, and then, React Native, you just have 2. It seems things are much, much different. Maybe the advertisement or marketing around that just isn't there, or maybe it's just not in my circle.
I would agree. I think Google's way better at marketing their stuff, and they do a great job, to be honest, in like developer relationships and whatnot. Not that Facebook is horrible at it, but Facebook does, they have their own internal customer, and they have things that they're focused on. But with that said, they've been reaching out. They reached out to us and are going to be asking us a bunch of questions about how we use React Native. So there's a lot going on for sure. And I think that, like a lot of this stuff, it's like, you sort of have the hype cycle, right? So like it was hyped up big time when it first came out, but then it kind of drops off and everybody's like, oh, well, React Native's dead, right? But then it just like slowly is rising and rising and rising and rising. And we've been seeing that happen the whole time because we're pretty tuned into it. I think overall, it's in a pretty good place. And I honestly, Flutter is part of that story as well. Because Flutter pushes React Native just like React Native pushes Flutter. If there's no alternative, then, who cares, right? But if there's an alternative, then React Native has to get better or else it's not going to get used. And so same thing with Flutter. Flutter 2 is out now because, one of the things was like, there's no web story. Well, now there is. Like it's very much a Flutter 2 now has web as a first class citizen. May never be as big as React, right? Like React is huge, but it's there and you can do it, right? So I think that they both push each other in good ways. When one comes out with a great feature, it's okay to copy it. Like that's fine. Like this helps all of us developers, like I don't own Google, I don't own Facebook. So for me, this is all good.
Yeah. Actually, I have a question. So I know React is usually for web, but what is React Native for web? Because that's kind of blowing my mind about what does that actually mean?
Yeah. Why would you ever do that? It's a weird thing, but, to be completely honest, I actually think that React Native Web is what React should have been like originally. Because what React did was it took this virtual DOM, like this JSX type thing, and it married it with React DOM. And React DOM really is using, through JSX, it's using divs, spans, A's, P tags, strong, like all these things are actual like HTML tags, right? I don't think it should have been that. I think it should have started with views and buttons and things like that, images. It should have started with what I would consider to be like generic components that then get translated into divs on the back end. They get translated into image tags on the background, things like that. So to me, that's what React Native Web is, because you basically have an API. React versus React Native. React has the divs, Ps, etc. React Native uses Vue as its main building block. That doesn't exist on web. You don't use a Vue tag, right? But it uses Vue, and Vue is a primitive that works fine on Android and it works fine on iOS. On iOS, it would be a UI view. That's the backing thing. And on Android, it would be an Android view. I don't know. It's one of Android view, I guess, or component. And so it translates that on the back end. There's no reason that we can't do the same thing on web and make that a div. That same view, it could be a div. And then the other thing it does, the React Native does, it has Yoga. Yoga is, most people don't even know this because it's so transparent, but like what you do is you give it basically a CSS-like thing with Flexbox and whatnot. And Yoga is a layout engine that works basically like what you would see in a browser. And so it lays out on the screen just using CSS-like properties. And so instead of using Yoga on web, they just emit CSS and it works how you would expect. Okay,
so React Native for web is similar to React. Let me just try to back up my understanding. But when you write React for web, you use divs, everything. But if you write React Native, you cannot use divs and p tags and all that. You have to use React Native specific components.
Yeah.
So now you can really share more code, right? If you go this route.
Exactly, because they're a view, and a view is a view is a view. It doesn't matter if it's on the web, which would be a div. It doesn't matter if it's on Android, an Android view, or if it's on iOS, it's a UI view. It could also be on Windows. And what is whatever Windows uses for a view, and whatever Mac OS uses for a view, which would probably be like an NS view or something like that. So each of these things, it's a more generic name for it rather than div, because div doesn't mean anything on Android. Div doesn't mean anything on iOS. And so using the word div or the tag div doesn't actually make sense in a mobile context. And so that's why I think it was I think it's what what React.js should have been. Of course, adoption's easier when you can just map it directly. So I get it.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. Yeah. So what about having the idea of, I think one of the things that's difficult for me to think about and to do properly is like, React really goes for the idea of immutable data. But I mean, things need to change, right? So does this actually work properly with React Native? Like, do you ever find yourself like, man, I really want to like mutate this data, but I can't?
Yeah. So it is JavaScript straight up. So you can still mutate things, but the way that React wants you to do it with set state and whatnot is to, make shallow clones or deep clones of things and then update them. So I'm kind of old school. I've been around a long time. I've been doing this a long time, since 1991 or 1992. I don't think mutable data is as bad as people make it out to be, right? Like, I feel like there's a place for it. Immutable data, I understand, like is very valuable, and especially in shared contexts where you don't want to be changing someone else's memory. I understand that. But because of that, Redux, really, which was the state management system that kind of came out in the, 2015, 2014, whenever it was that it really became really popular. That really kind of brought that immutable data. It's kind of an Elm-like, Elm-lang type approach to JavaScript. And we did Redux for a few years, but what we actually really liked was MobX state tree, which was based on MobX, but then it builds sort of like a Redux-like pattern around it, where you can mutate things, but only in certain cases or in certain places. So it gives you, like, if you're going to make a change, you have to do it right here. You can't do it anywhere else. And then it's protected and it's kind of like managed and whatnot. And then when you make those changes, any observers, which would be like a component that's using this data, will re-render at that point. So it becomes very fast. It becomes very targeted. Like, only the component that cares about that data will re-render. We use that. That's not really a React pattern. That's more of our own pattern or MobX state tree pattern. So you're able to kind of layer things on top of it to work the way you want it to. If you want everything to be immutable, you can do it that way. If you want things to be, if you want to be passing props all the way down to the leaf nodes and make them re-render, you can do it that way if you want. There's a few different ways you can kind of go about it. And React specifically and React Native have the core teams have been very, very loath to say this is the way to do state management. And that's been both a good and a bad thing.
So state management within React is similar to Flutter, where everybody is flaming each other about which one to use and which one's the best, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there, like I said, there's good and bad. So the bad is that you get kind of like these tribal lines drawn and, things like that. The good, though, is if the core team says this is the way to do state management and then a better way comes out, like, what do? Like, you stay with the standard but worse version, or do you like kind of hack on top of it something better? By leaving it open, Wild West, whatever, you get all this experimentation. Like, I don't like Redux. Maybe I don't like MobX state tree either. I'm going to try something else. I'm going to do something else. Maybe I'll just use GraphQL queries, or maybe I'll use MobX specifically just by itself instead of MobX state tree, or whatever. Like, there's so many state management. In fact, my partner Gant Laborde has a whole repo that's dedicated to state management systems, and it's called React State Museum. If you go to the React State Museum, it's full of examples of it's sort of like, remember To-Do MVC, like the original? Well, it's sort of that for React state management. And so there's all different examples of how to do things in different state management things. So at the end of the day, we had a lot of choice, and we ended up settling on MobX state tree, and we've been pretty happy with it about 4 years.
Now, is MobX state tree the same as MobX? Because I do know MobX.
It's powered by MobX. And by the way, it works on Flutter too. And I'm actually the primary maintainer of MobX state tree now. But essentially, it gives you a bunch of tools and patterns on top of MobX, because MobX is a little too like, it just gives you like basic tools, and then you have to build your own state management system around it. Where MobX state tree says, this is how you do it. And it gives you some tools to do it, and like things like runtime type checking and automatic TypeScript type generation and things like that. So I'm a big fan of MobX state tree. I probably wouldn't just build an app using just MobX, but people do, and they do fine with it too.
Yeah, I tried playing with MobX before because I have a client right now who said, this is what we use in our React app, so can we use this in Flutter?
Yeah.
And I find it so similar to after a while, I feel like some of these patterns, these statements, they're really similar at the core. So it's like,
right.
Yeah, this is nice, but for Flutter, there is a code generation aspect. You have to generate a lot of code for it. And I thought this is just too much for me. This doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. I haven't used it with Flutter, so I have no idea how sort of that kind of all comes together.
Yeah, I mean, but in general, the idea of observing stuff and waiting for changes, I mean, I think for any mobile or UI framework, it's all about events happening.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And what's cool about what I like about MobX State Tree, and specifically MobX React, which is what we use, MobX React Lite, which is what we use to kind of observe, is that when you access a property of your store or model or whatever, it tracks that. And so it says, hey, in this component that I'm tracking or like wrapping here, they accessed user.firstname. And then anytime user.firstname changes, it's like, hey, and you can only change it in an action. So you trigger an action, you say, change the first name. Now, every observer out there that has ever accessed first name is like, okay, I need to re-render, including things like derived, computed data. So like, if you had .full name, and full name was composed of first name and last name. Well, now, it knows that full name accessed first name, and when first name changes, anything that accessed full name needs to change as well. So it's really targeted that way. It works quite well. We've run into a few issues with very large apps with some performance with it, and we're looking at ways to sort of mitigate that. Not so much big apps, but more like big screens that are full of like tons of changing information that's changing all the time. Like if you had a stock chart thing that was just constantly changing, it starts to hit the limit of MobX State Tree. And so we're kind of looking at that and seeing, how we can improve things.
Yeah, that makes some sense. Yeah, I remember looking at MobX and I thought that was kind of cool, but yeah, like you said, if you have a bunch of stuff that's related to that, it's just gets really heavy.
Yeah, totally. Yep. Because that's a lot to kind of track. And I think that like anything, you're trading off. Like for us, it's the developer experience, because a lot of our clients are, startups, companies that are scale ups, like companies that are really trying to hit another gear. And so a lot of what they're looking at is efficiency of development, and not necessarily always like super focused on the performance right away. Now we obviously come back in later and start doing performance passes and stuff like that. But that's where a lot of our clients have been.
So now the next question I have is like, what's in your toolbox when you start developing an app? Because for me, when I use Flutter, I like to use Android Studio. I can still debug straight into the native stuff. The tooling is really great in there. How about for React? Because my impression of React is that there's not a lot of great tooling, but I did this years ago, right? So I'm aware that it's probably changed for the better. So what would be like in your toolbox when you create a React Native app?
That's a great question. So recently I've actually been doing some Twitch streaming, which has been fun, because as CTO, I don't get to be as hands-on all the time. I'm helping people, but a lot of my stuff is just managing the team of, 20 React Native developers. So I'm not in the code a lot. But I've been doing that on Twitch. And it's been great. And what I did recently, I was actually in Android Studio a lot in this recent one, where I was actually building an Android native component and then bringing that back into React Native and mounting that component as a native component. And then having some interaction. So like you tap it on the native side, it would handle the tap and then do like a flip animation in the background, and then also send like an on press to React Native so that React Native could do stuff. So there's some communication back and forth, but there's stuff happening in Java on the back end. I could use Kotlin if I wanted to, but I stayed in Java. And so because of that, I was definitely in Android Studio a lot. And I think that in certain parts of a project, you'll definitely be using Android Studio quite a bit. Same thing with Xcode for iOS, and I'm going to be doing that probably pretty soon. I don't know if tomorrow is my next stream date, and I might tackle iOS at that point. But a lot of our tooling, you're right, it has gotten better over the years. We actually built a tool called Reactatron. Reactatron can be used with web, but it can also be used with React Native. And so, and it's more useful with React Native just because that's what we use it for. So we optimize it for that. But it works with Redux. It also works with MobX state tree. There are some other plugins for other state management systems. It allows you to inspect your state, change your state, send commands to the JavaScript layer dynamically. So you can be like, hey, reset all the stores. I want to go back, or like, hey, go to this. You can like take state snapshots and be like, I want to go to this state. Like I'm logged in and ready to go or something like that. So Reactatron is a free desktop app that works on Mac, Linux, Windows, and it allows you to kind of connect in with that. So that's been a big part. There's also Flipper, and Flipper came out from Facebook a couple of years ago. They actually approached us to implement React Native into Flipper as the first plugin for Flipper. So Reactatron is in Flipper as well. You can use it in Flipper. And Flipper gives you, it was actually originally designed for native apps, not for React Native, but then they kind of expanded it to work with React Native as well. And so that gives you things like you can break down the view hierarchy and whatnot, and a lot of like more native performance and profiling and things like that. You can also use dev tools for various things. You can connect it up to Chrome and run things from there. So there's a lot of stuff that's gone. I think that there's still some room to grow there. React Native still needs more tooling, and it's slowly kind of happening, but yeah, there's definitely some room to grow there. Overall though, most of the time we're going to be using Xcode, Android Studio, Reactatron, Flipper, and we may use some other specialized tools as well. And then of course a lot of old school debugging with, console.log.
I find that quite interesting because I think for majority of Flutter apps, you just stay in VS Code or Android Studio, depending which one you want to use. You don't really flip around to other editors. So you're saying like, if you really want to be into React Native, you should still get comfortable with both ends of the spectrum, right?
I think to be an expert, you probably should. But you can do 90% of what in fact, I have developers who really don't ever touch the native side ever. And they've been working on apps for a long time, but they're just building React stuff. Most of the time, if you take a React developer, like someone who's familiar with React, and drop them into a React Native project, they're pretty much productive within about a week or two. Then once you get them going with that, they're not necessarily going to be able to, solve the hardest problems. It's one of those things that's easy to learn, hard to master, right? So it's like you're able to be productive, but you're not necessarily able to do everything. And so that's something that I try to bring to my team, is the ability to deep dive into the native side of things. We have some other people at Infinite Red who are really good with native. But I would say half the team probably doesn't spend any time in native, hardly ever. So it really depends on what you're doing. Like in my live streams, I like taking on some of these harder topics, like, hey, let's build a native component in both iOS and Android and have it interface over to React Native. That's fun to me. Although, sometimes frustrating too, because there's always, interactions and whatnot.
One of the things that React Native definitely has upon Flutter, and I know people are looking for it, and I know some of my clients also want it, which is push upgrade, right? Where you can push over the wire and you can upgrade people's apps without them actually having to go to the store. How does this actually work? Do you know?
I actually demonstrated that in a recent, sorry to do all this self-promotion, but I actually did this in a recent Twitch stream. And so there's a couple of, there's probably more than two ways to do this, but Microsoft has Microsoft Code Push, which is really cool. And they handle a lot of things. Expo, which is a layer built on top, and a service basically built on top of React Native, has their own called Expo Updates. Expo updates is what I played with. We've done Microsoft Code Push. It's fine. Does its job. It's good. I wanted to try Expo updates. It was really, really cool how that worked. So at the end of the day, when you're developing a React Native app, you have a Metro server is what it's called. Metro is the package, and it's watching your JavaScript, and it's basically acting like Webpack or one of these others where it'll bundle it up for you into a single file, because you just need one file for React Native, like just one JavaScript file. It'll load it in, start executing it. Okay. So it, like, your app that's on your phone or your simulator is reaching out to this, local host 8000 or whatever, downloading that file, and then runs it. So anytime you change it, you can just refresh and you're back with the latest JavaScript bundle. When you go to production, you build that bundle once, and then it gets actually added in as like an asset, right? Like just like an image file or any other asset into your app. And then your app refers to it using more of an asset path, and loads that up into JavaScript core, if that's what you're using, which is the normal JavaScript thing, or Hermes, which is the new way to do it. Facebook has been doing a lot of work building this new JavaScript engine that is specifically tuned for React Native apps, because JavaScript core is more for websites, and it's tuned for what websites need, where React Native has different trade-offs that are necessary, like fast, speedy startup time is really, really important. Like, when you have a browser, your JavaScript engine is up and running already, right? When you go to a new web page, you don't have to start the JavaScript engine. You just feed it the new JavaScript, right? So that's what JavaScript core is about. It's like, give me new JavaScript and I'll parse it really quick and do it. That doesn't work for React Native, because the very first thing you do is spin up the JavaScript engine and give it JavaScript. And then you don't give it new JavaScript very often. Like, that's it. You're running. So it's a different like profile for performance. So either JavaScript core or Hermes. Those are the two things. Now, what's cool about that is it's just a file. It's just a file. Like, it's just literally a JavaScript file. So I can run a command to bundle up new JavaScript. And then in the app, I have a little thing that's just checking a location once in a while. Maybe once on startup, or maybe like once an hour or whatever. Like, it checks and it says, what's your version? And then it tells it the version, maybe a hash or something. And then it says, oh, that matches mine. No update. Okay, we're good. And it moves on. But if it gets back a different hash or a different version number, it says, okay, update available. And now you, as an application developer, you'll get a call back. It says, like, update is available. And you can choose, do I want to defer this? Do I want to ask the user? Do you want to download the update? Or do you just do it and force them to restart right now? Like, this is an app like decision, a product decision. So we've all been in apps where it says new update available, tap here to restart. We've seen that. That's what's happening. It's going out, it's downloading the app or the new bundle. It sits there alongside the other one, like the new one sitting there. Next time you load up the app, it uses the new one. And now you've got all of the new functionality. Big concern here was Apple, and to some degree Google, but mostly Apple. Apple has long been like, no, you can't change the functionality of your app without going through app review. Like, this is a big deal. But for some reason, they've been okay with this. And as far as I can tell, they're going to continue to be good with this. And they've told developers we're going to continue to be good with this. Because, like, Facebook's doing it all the time. Instagram's doing it all the time. Coinbase and all these companies are using this code push or Expo updates, or their own hand-rolled version of that, because you can do it yourself if you want. So all of these things are available. In a lot of ways, it's not that different than having a web page open that detects that, hey, there's a new JavaScript bundle, and then prompts you to refresh, right? It's not that different than that, because you are running JavaScript on the actual client. So that's one of the benefits of doing that. I know with Flutter, since you're compiling, I think you're compiling to native code. It's not as easy to do that. Now, there's some benefits to compiling to native code for sure. But like, that's one thing that I think makes it a little, that's why they probably haven't released it yet. That's something that's a little tougher. It's not just replacing a file, in other words.
Yeah, because there's a long discussion I'm also looking at too, because there's so many times where like you launch something. I've literally had days where it's like I launched it and then like it's in the app review and maybe it was just like, maybe it's like literally in review. And all of a sudden my client's like, oh, I just found a bug. I was like, oh. It's been days like that and you're like, oh yeah, this isn't good.
And that cycle, that loop, is just too long with, now it's gotten better for sure. It's like way easier to get updates through, especially urgent ones. We actually had for our conference in Portland, Chain React, which is a React Native focused conference, only one in the US. So we had the conference app was built in React Native and we had a bug in Android and we were like freaking out about it, on the day that we were starting the conference, and it would like crash if you went to a certain place. So one of our developers just went in there, made a fix. It was just like an undefined error problem, and then pushed it out as a code push update, and we were good. Like it fixed it. Now there's things like rollbacks and stuff like that built into this. Both Expo updates and code push have that. But yeah, that was really cool. It was really cool to see that.
Now, I do have one more thing that kind of came up in my mind is, I think, did we mention the word dog fooding today, or was that yesterday? I think recently somebody was talking about dog fooding. Maybe we didn't talk about it today in this one.
Not yet, yeah.
But let's talk about that now, right? So, I mean, Facebook came out. They are using React Native, right, for their main Facebook app. But if I remember correctly, Messenger has been rewritten to be 100% native, right? Does that give you any kind of concern or anything? Because I think their big thing was like, we have to have great performance.
Right.
We have to have, because I think they're aiming Messenger to be used in these low bandwidth, low kind of places, right? So it's like when you have React Native, you're not just shipping just an iOS app with what you can build basic components. There's other stuff added onto it.
Right. Yeah.
So, like, is there any concerns for like or any thoughts about this where even Facebook's like, listen, we can't use React Native at this point. We have to go with native.
I'm wondering how much I can say about this. I think there's let me do a real quick. I think it's actually common. Let me go here. I'm gonna do a search on Twitter to see if I can. Let's see here. Okay. Yes, Eli White has talked about this publicly, so I can say. So they are actually. It's true that Messenger. I think on iOS and Android, they're staying with native. I think that's still true. But on desktop, they are switching it over to React Native. So they're going with React Native Windows and React Native macOS for desktop Messenger, which is currently Electron, by the way. So the Messenger team is using React Native, maybe not for iOS and Android. And I wasn't privy to those discussions, so I don't know exactly why they made those decisions. Often they can be also organizational. I'd be very interested. I should ask Eli, like how, like what led to those decisions to go with native there. I don't mind it at all, though. Like we were native developers before we were React Native developers. We know that we can build software using native, and sometimes it makes sense. Like I wouldn't build a React Native like immersive game, for example. You probably would with Flutter, but probably not with React Native. That's not what it's built for. So there are some situations where React Native doesn't make sense. And if you have the ability to field, two teams, Android and iOS, and somehow keep them synced up, because that's one of the big things that Flutter and React Native both solve, the fact that you can release features at the same time and not just be like, oh yeah, Android, you're coming soon, then you can do that. And there are some wins that you get by doing that, for sure. But yeah, I don't know for sure, but I do know that the Messenger team is using React Native, maybe not for the iOS and Android side of it.
I think my last question is one of the things I did bring up when we had the email exchange a while back. what would you say React Native would be a great choice for, and what do you say it's maybe not so great choice for? So obviously, like you said, making a game probably isn't the best idea. Maybe you can dig into that.
Yeah. So one of the fundamental differences that I think Flutter and React Native, between the two, Flutter very much wants to control its canvas. Like it's going to do its own drawing. It's going to like use its own kind of way of it's going to be its own rendering engine, basically. Even on web, it's using Canvas, for example. If I'm correct, I think it is. And the benefit of that is that you can have this fine-grained control over everything. It really like you can get performance out of it, and you can also just make sure that it's rendering exactly what you want. The downside is that you're not, quote unquote, using the platform. You're not using divs, you're not using spans, you're not using the primitives that the platform is expecting you to use. React Native will use that. It's using UI views, it's using Android layouts, it's using what is kind of native to the platform itself. And so because of that, the things that you would build using the platform primitives make it a good fit for React Native. Where I think Flutter kind of comes in, where you want control over immersive experiences and ability to, kind of have that level of control. There's a lot of overlap there. There are a lot of things where either direction would work fine. Like you can use either one. The other place, and I think this actually overrides everything else. And that's why when I want to be provocative to Flutter developers, what I say is Flutter is better than React Native in all the ways that don't matter. Now that's tongue in cheek, so don't take too much offense to that. But where I think it really matters is the fact that we've got this huge powerhouse that's called React, the web side of it. Just overarching so much of web right now. So many people are using React. And because of that, you have this natural onboarding of React to React Native developers. That's like a natural thing. Sort of like Ruby to Elixir developers. That's like, you're not getting Erlang developers, you're getting Ruby developers that want to do Elixir. That's what tends to happen over there. And so I like that. I like that there's a natural onboarding from React to React Native. You get a bunch of, now there's still plenty of React Native jobs because there's still not enough people doing it. Plenty of companies that need jobs filled there. But so there's that, and there's just the whole community. And because there's so much overlap from React, then you get kind of that power. So like I look at that as being, if you came in and you were like, hey, we're already doing React web, I'm not sure why you would choose Flutter if you're already a React shop, right? Like React to React Native is a short step. If you're not doing React, now it becomes like, go ahead and make a decision. Like what is your particular project need? Do you want to do Dart? Do you want to do TypeScript or JavaScript? Like there's a lot of valid decisions to make there. But yeah, I think that's the big one, is the community and the tie-in with React. It's just, it's impossible for Flutter to really compete with the fact that there's just this huge amount of React developers out there. I think when it comes to the technology and the developer experience, there's probably some stuff Flutter really has a leg up on React Native. And, hopefully that'll go back and forth over time. It's sort of Ford versus Chevy type of a, discussion, where sometimes one's better, sometimes the other's better. It's fine. Like we can debate about those all day long. But it's really kind of ecosystem stuff that I would point to as saying, React Native really shines out.
It's a good point. Okay. No, I think that's definitely in line with my thinking, is that, yeah, maybe React Native has improved since the last time I tried it out.
Yeah.
And also, if you're using React, it probably makes more sense to get into React Native.
Right.
So,
yeah. And like I said, I think it's great that they push each other. Because at the end of the day, if it was just Flutter and that was all we had, or it was just React Native and that's all we had, we'd be worse off as developers, because you don't have choices. And you also don't have like the Flutter community comes up with cool stuff all the time that we as React Native community are like, hey, we want that, and then someone builds it, right? And vice versa. So these are things that we push each other and we innovate, and those two communities just help each other out. There's obviously tongue-in-cheek kind of good-natured ribbing between the two groups, and I think that's great. I think it's fun. But at the end of the day, we're all better off for this.
Yeah, I hope we can get along a little bit better. But then again, it's no fun, having somebody and you can't dig on them. I don't know. That's just my family culture is you have to pick on people. If you don't like the guy, you don't talk to him. If you like him, you pick on him. That's just our family culture, at least.
We should have you on React Native Radio. That'd be fun. And then you can talk to us about Flutter. We had an episode about Flutter too, but given that we're all React Native developers, I think that we left a lot of context behind. So having you on the show to talk about Flutter would be a great idea. So we should make that happen. Yeah,
just send me the invite. I'll be more happy to come on. Just make sure it's at a good time. So if it's earlier in your day, it's actually probably better for me.
Right. Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I apologize about kind of still waking up.
It's all good.
This morning, just understand that time zones suck.
They sure do.
No choice.
Yeah, I just think it's cool that we get to talk and we're half a world apart. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, indeed. And again, you're bringing me a good feeling, right? So the fact that you're laughing and smiling and enjoying your life. But then again, maybe, as I say, and you're still writing React Native, maybe there's something, maybe things have been gotten better. But also, you also said you're not as hands-on as you used to be, so maybe that's also it. So I don't know. Let's have a try.
I mean, I think I would, the metric I would probably use is certainly my own developer happiness with my team. And they've been very happy with it. And then also how fast our stack has been changing to try to make things better. It really hasn't been changing that much lately. The first couple of years, definitely a ton. And then in the last 4 years, it's been more incremental. And that's because we found sort of a groove. So, we'll see as Fabric comes out and some of these other changes kind of happen, how that affects things. Hopefully 1.0 follows soon after. That's really what we're waiting for, I think. Is this re-architecture. Once that happens, then we'll see. But overall, life as a React Native developer and hopefully as a Flutter developer has been pretty good.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can somehow converge at some point. But yeah, like I said, it's also good to keep separate, right? Apple and Windows keep stealing off of each other. But
exactly.
So, all right, I think we kept you here for quite a while. I really enjoyed chatting with you. I think we didn't get through all the points I wanted to get through, but I think I got a much better idea. And it's all sounds good. So did you have anything you wanted to kind of, pitch out to, I suppose, probably React Native Radio?
Yeah, definitely check out reactnativeradio.com and also my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Jamon Holmgren, my first and last name. I'm going to be doing some live coding if you want to drop by and make a few cracks about React Native. I don't mind. I like and enjoy banter with my audience there, and of course Twitter at Jamon Holmgren. You can find me there. I'm pretty active on Twitter. Happy to chat with everybody. Take criticism, take compliments, all those things. It's that sort of feedback's how we all get better.
Yeah, true. So, I like criticism, but also as long as it kind of puts you somewhere, right? Just, ask some people that you're too ugly is not much you can do about that. But
not much you can do about that. Yeah.
If your coding style is could use some improvement, okay, that's well said.
Yep.
Okay.
I appreciate you having me on, Alan. It was a great time here.
Thanks so much. Also appreciate you having you on too. So maybe you can come back again later on. So you said that React is releasing some new features, right? Fiber, I believe you announced.
Yeah, they're going to make an announcement. They've already talked about it before, but they're going to make an announcement, I believe, tomorrow morning, React Native EU. That's 6 a.m. my time, so I don't know exactly what time that is for you. I should probably convert that to UTC. That's Pacific time, so 6 a.m. Pacific to UTC that's 1 p.m. UTC. So whatever that is for you.
Well, over here is -8, so 8 hours before that, which too early for me to be doing math. I don't even like doing math even when I'm fully awake. That's why I do computer programming, right? But I think if these upgrades are good and you think that it's worth talking about, and especially if it brings it closer to native performance with Flutter or something, then I think we should come back on, and once we once you take some time to wrap your mind around all the different changes, it could be worth it to talk about. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, happy to.
Okay. Again, thank you again for coming. Cool. Hopefully you're back on soon, and let's see if we can push each other to be better and have better tools.
Totally. Thanks a lot.